Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 198, Beating the Odds Through Choral Music with Stephen Hankle. Because of music in this time and space, we can hold hands and we can sing a common song. You're going to hear Stephen tell this story later in the episode to illustrate the ways that music can help us transcend the issues that divide us. Dr. Stephen Hankle directs the choirs at University of Dayton in Ohio. Stephen caught my attention recently with a very vulnerable post on Facebook, which he was both celebrating his recent promotion to tenured professor and expressing his gratitude for the people that helped him beat the odds as an African-American male growing up in the South Side of Chicago. So I asked Stephen to be even more vulnerable and join me to explore this story even further. How can music and ensemble create a bridge for a person's life that helps them climb a mountain? In this episode, we will hear what it was like for Stephen growing up and why being a tenured professor in choral music is such a significant departure from what young Stephen envisioned for his life. We also will cover the socioeconomic issues facing many inner-city kids and how that impacts their education, the misleading nature of racial language, the power of choral music as an agent for social change, and the way Stephen's story has impacted his teaching philosophy. So tune in, and as always, have your thinking stimulated and challenged, and then weigh in yourself on Facebook in the Choralosophers group or over on Substack at choralosophy.substack.com. Calling all concert planners. Let's talk about Ludus. It's more than just a ticketing platform. It's a game changer for event management. Picture this: simplified ticketing, seamless marketing, powerful fundraising, and now, brand new this year, volunteer management. All for free to you and your organization. Thousands of organizations trust Ludus, and you should too. Elevate your events with Ludus. Sign up at ludus.com/choralosophy today and experience the difference. Patreon members really keep this show going financially every month, making sure all the costs are covered out of pocket. But they also get access to my Google folder of goodies, the private podcast feed. They find out who's coming on the show ahead of time, and a variety of other fun little conversations that we're able to have over on the Patreon page. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clixbull, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, DF, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. All right, everybody, I'm here with Dr. Stephen Hankle, and I was inspired to invite Stephen on because of a post that I saw announcing his tenure at University of Dayton, and so that's exciting. Congratulations on the recent promotion.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I was inspired because of just the vulnerability. I'm always interested in people communicating their stories and the things that we wouldn't know about a person unless they were vulnerable enough to make some kind of a public biography, so to speak. So I'm interested in digging into that because I'm also interested in choir directors and what makes them tick. So Stephen, welcome.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about you, just kind of the brief biographical. I know we're going to get into some more biographical here in a little bit, but where do you come from? What do you do every day?
Well, I come from South Side of Chicago, Illinois. That's where I was born and raised, and grew up there. I was a athletic guy and loved to sing. And this and we'll talk about it, I guess, some more I went through my life. Music was always a big part of that. And through some events that really pushed me towards music, it became my calling. Right now, my current position at the University of Dayton, associate professor now of choral music and music education. I conduct the University Choral mixed ensemble, as well as the women's choir there, Bella Voce, or treble choir, Bella Voce. And I teach choral music education classes, choral conducting. And I'm also the choir director for the Dayton Philharmonic Chorus here in Dayton as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So it sounds like it keeps you busy. Are you almost done with your semester?
Semester is, students are officially done. They were done on Friday, last day of finals, turned in the grades. And we're officially off contract next week on the 15th. So, yeah.
Well, that's exciting. I've got like 2.5 weeks left, so we won't talk about that. All right. Okay. So I'm here. I'm going to just read for the audience. I'm going to put some screenshots of this in my show notes also. But I just want to set up the story this way, the same way you did, actually. So on Facebook, I saw Steven's post, and it started with this story is about a kid from the south side of Chicago raised by his father, beating the odds as a young African American male living past 21. Never in my dreams I thought I would get a PhD. And then you go on to kind of tell some more about that story and make your announcement, which is very cool. And I like the way that you framed it as a narrative. So tell us about what it means. I think most Americans do kind of have, when you say South Side of Chicago, a lot of Americans get a picture of what that is. How would you describe why it's significant to feel like you came out against odds when you're raised in South Chicago? Tell us about that and what that was like.
Yeah, so I want to say first, because of the narrative of Chicago and the South Side of Chicago, at times with all the murders and things that go on, there are a lot of beautiful people there, a lot of strong African American people that want us to do what I do, right? To be able to build us up and so that we can go out into the world and do something positive. But growing up in Southside Chicago, middle class home, for a while, my dad was a single parent. So it was the other way around, where usually the mom is taking care of the kids if the two separate, get a divorce. But my dad actually took care of my brother and I. And one of the things that he did, he worked very hard, worked very long hours to keep us in a decent neighborhood in Chicago because certain parts of Chicago was not great for young African American boys and girls, but I would say boys in general, because of the gangs and things that over time have become very negative in a lot of ways. And so when I say things like, growing up in the South Side of Chicago and making it past 21, that's a statistic, right? And unfortunately, there's a number of young Black and African American males, adolescents who don't make it to 21. And so to be able to um, be supported by people at the church that I went to, my father working long hours and helping us out, and just being a part of that community helped. And with a lot of luck and a lot of prayer, was able to get past that. And so, growing up, a lot of times to give you a picture was we were living in gang infested areas, right? You learned how to negotiate in the streets and navigate. There were my favorite color is gray, which is a shade. It's not a color. Because in Chicago, where we live, there are black stones. And so you wear colors black and red. If you were a gangster disciple, you wore green and black. If you were a BD, a black disciple, you wore blue and black. If you were a vice lord, you wore red and blue. So all these different colors, you wear your hat a certain way. So you could be walking in one neighborhood and all of a sudden you walk another one, there's a gang that is part of that. And if you're wearing the wrong colors or wearing your hat a certain way, you can be challenged or, get beat up or anything like that. So you learn how to navigate and understand how to get through that. So I would say there were times where I felt very safe and things of that nature, but there's a lot of times you're always kind of on edge, and so growing up in that environment teaches you a lot about grit, teach you a lot about perseverance, um, teach you a lot about street smarts. And that translates to a number of things, even as an educator now, when I'm working with kids from inner cities and things, even in my early career when I taught in inner city schools. So that's what helped. And so, yeah, so I mean, that's what it was like as far as the environment, right? Like I
Yeah.
said, a lot of good people there, but in the environment, it was that. So my dad used to put us in karate. That's when I started playing basketball, which I play all the way through college. Other things to kind of keep us out of the streets. And then at the church that I went to Catholic church. It was a good community to help us keep us out of those places that can get us in trouble, to join a gang, to find belonging. And so, yeah, so that's what it was like from an environment standpoint.
Let's look at it. I'd like your feedback on this because now that you're an adult and an educator and teaching educators, and you spent time teaching maybe students that were in similar situations, if you were working in inner city schools, I'm sure you've reflected on this question. In your childhood, how did that surrounding that environment, growing up with that possibility of of violence, maybe on a higher to a higher degree than a lot of people experience. How does that then affect your ability to approach your school? Does it affect the culture of the school? How did it affect your learning as a kid, do you think?
Um, well, at school, I went to a Catholic school from kindergarten to eighth grade. Um, there were smaller classes
Mm,
that helped. Still got into fights. I remember getting into fights outside of class and things of that nature. But I think what helped being at that particular school, it wasn't like I had to worry about, all the time. Like, okay, if I walk out the classroom, or go outside the school, we were in a pretty good neighborhood. Chicago's very interesting because if you live in the big city, there'll be pockets, right? There'll be pockets of like this really nice neighborhood. Things are upkeep and everything, and then you go down the street, and all of a sudden it's totally different, right? So in that particular environment, I was able to feel pretty much safe. The teachers were good teachers, most of them, and felt safe. And so I felt in a safe place in the church as well. Like the church, I was an altar boy, so I stayed involved, and so that helped me feel, being a good place for me to learn, to grow. It did still came with challenges. Having fights with kids sometimes in class, seeing some unfortunate things happen. But you just, as a kid, you don't know. You're just adapting. You don't
hmm
know that this is not normal, right? So you're just kind of adapting to what it is. But for the most part, I had good teachers, good environment. Um, the priests and the sisters there looked after the kids, the parents as well when we had the church and the school together. So that helped in that way when I was growing up, especially K through eighth. High school was different. I went to a public high school. Started at Catholic, then I moved to a public, but it was right down the street from where I lived, and that actually was a good Kenwood Academy was the school, and that's where I got a lot of my music as well, training and things. So that environment was good too, but there was times where we had like 3 or 4 days of fights happening in the school. So again, you just learn how to find where the safe spaces were. That's where you stayed versus trying to do something else. And you just learned as you went through. So
That's amazing. How would you describe yourself as a student at that time? How did you approach your class? Like, how was your attitude? Were you a good kid? Were you an unruly kid? How would you describe yourself?
crazy is what you're trying to say? No, I was I was a good kid. I mean, one thing that my dad did, I love him to death, but he was crazy, but he had to do as I got older, I understood. He would put the fear in God in us. I had a brother that was 16 months older than me. And he would say things like, if you join a gang, I'll kill you. And we used to say, you can't kill us. He was like, I brought you in this world, I'll take you out, right? But it was his way of trying to keep us on the straight and narrow. Obviously, he didn't do anything crazy to us. But but he was big about school, and he wanted us to go to school. He always tell us, get B's for me, A's are for you. So it wasn't like this pressure, like I gotta get all A's, but it made me want to go and to do well. And so, my dad was a big driver of that. And so I went to class. I didn't cut, much, every so often as kids do sometimes. But for the most part, I was in class every day, and I would, work pretty hard, as hard as I could. I had deficiency in reading. I had to have a tutor most of K through or fourth grade to eighth grade. But he was really big on us going to school. So I was pretty good.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything crazy. Um, you know.
In your post, you had made a comment about how one of the things you had thought was that your way out would be basketball. And what I'm curious about too is like at what point along the way did you start to make that or that little light bulb go off in your head where maybe academia is a path I could go down. Maybe I could be a teacher. Maybe it's not basketball. Where was that divergence in your life?
Well, interesting enough, like I said earlier in our interview that basketball was a big thing for me. I was collegiate athlete. I was scholarship. I trained. I worked at it really hard. I loved it. It was a form of discipline that I really enjoyed. Um, but what really turned me was once I got to college, I started taking music classes, right? I was in choir through, the church I went to and in high school, but not really like musical training, right? I didn't really get like my first musical training, first class piano was college. And so as I was playing through my eligibility, I was like, well, maybe I can go overseas. Like I was, but I always stayed in choir. Then I started to take music classes. I went to a junior college at first, and then from there, when I got to a 4-year school, um, I decided I want to do music, but I didn't know exactly in what capacity. I just know that's something that I love to do. When I got to San Francisco State, which was the college I went to, university, I joined the choir, and Josh Haberman was the director at the time, and he let me in the group, and I wasn't like at the level, but I had a low E flat. So
Okay.
they're like, oh, and I can match pitch obviously, but as far as like the skills that I would have needed to actually be in the group, he just saw the potential that I had and stayed and worked with me. And so I was singing, I was doing electronic music was my major, okay? Because I thought I was going to be a producer. I love Babyface, the producer Babyface, but the degree that I was doing it was more like composition based, and I was like, I don't want to do this. And then I got a chance to go to a studio with the producer and see what he does, and I said, I don't know if I want to sit at a board all day and do these things and mess with sounds and stuff. But I knew that I loved choir. Like I loved singing in a group. That was something that I absolutely loved. And so I went to Cuba with the chamber singers at San Francisco State with Joshua Haberman. And I remember we went to this School for the Arts. Now, when we say School for the Arts, mostly in the US, we think, pretty good resources. The facilities are nice. Of course, the kids are talented because they want to be there. All the things that some choir directors who don't work at a school for the arts would love to have. And so we get to this particular place in Cuba, and the place is run down. I mean, it is, the embargo, of course, they don't have the trade and things that, to build up things, stuff like that. And I remember we did, a good old music exchange. So the kids were doing amazing things. One kid was playing Spanish guitar or classical guitar. One kid, she had to be like 9 or 10, was playing a Beethoven sonata.
Hmm.
Okay. And and then we had a kid playing violin. I remember I had a choir mate, his name was Victor, who played violin or viola. And he said that kid is better than some of our kids at the university. Yeah. And so we sang for them, kind of this music exchange, great time. We're about to leave. All of a sudden, this group of schoolgirls walk into the room. And Joshua Haberman can speak fluent Spanish. So he was talking to their teacher. And so Josh came to us and he said, hey, these kids, their bus, they knew we were coming. Their bus broke down about 2 miles away. They walked here to come see you sing. Okay. And he said, would you be okay singing for us? Singing for them. And we all said, absolutely. So we sang the song, did our set again. But this was the thing that changed my life. We got together after that and we held hands in a circle. Okay. I don't know why I learned this song in Chicago because on the South Side, if you go a little further south, there's also a lot of Latinos, Mexicans and things. And so the Catholic Church is very good about incorporating other, cultures and things into the church, into the mass. I don't know if this is what was a song for like a sacred song, whatever. But I remember all of a sudden we get in a circle and we start singing $1 mera, badida $1 mera. I don't know why I knew that song, but I knew it, and I remember singing that song. I'm 20 years old at the time, and I'm looking around at these kids. And right there, I had a moment. I said, because of our countries and the history of our countries, we have, conflict, right? I'm looking at these kids and I'm saying, these kids will probably never have the same opportunities that I would have. And I said, because of those things, that's something that I recognized and said, wow, I'll probably never even see them again. But I said, because of music, in this moment, in this time and space, we can hold hands and we can sing a common song. And I
Hmm.
remember saying to myself, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I want music to be a part of my life for the rest of my life. So that was the moment. Fast forward 3 months later, or a month later, Joshua Haberman told us, well, down in Idlewild, in Southern California, they're looking for some ringers to sing at their music camp. And so I remember said, I was training for basketball, right? I was just my junior year. I still had another year left. So I stayed in California instead of going back home to Chicago. And I trained. I was a waiter, right? And I just did that over the summer. And by the end of summer, I would fly down to Idlewild and go to this camp. I go to this camp and it's like 150 like singers, high school singers. Ron King, he was the director for activities at Bakersfield College. He retired a number of years ago. He's a composer, all those things. And I met a couple other people that I'm still friends with today. And I remember we're singing. This is when I first met Eric Whitacre before he became Eric Whitacre, right? And back too. And we were singing his music. So he came up and Ron King had a piece he did and all this stuff. But I remember this was the one thing. We were singing 7 hours a day. We were up in the mountains, beautiful Southern California. And I just remember loving every second of it. We sang in a big group, men's group. We did some solo stuff. We did opera scenes. And I'm not a big opera person, but we did all these different things and I was loving it. Okay. Now, I remember Ron King saying, now remember, I just had Cuba experience in March. So this is in August. And Ron King said to us, we were all sitting on a break, and he said, I want you guys to go out and find a place where you can just have some time to yourself. And he said, I want you to figure out what you absolutely love doing. I said, okay. And he said, once you figure that out, I want you to figure out how you can make money doing it. For me, it was ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
So I literally just had that experience in Cuba. And so now I start thinking like, I love singing in groups, like absolutely love it. And I think all of my relationships with choir directors have been so positive. When I've been in basketball, I've always been captains of my team. I was always put in a position of leadership. And so I was like, choir director, right? And I remember said that was the moment, 2002 in August, where I really had that switch. I remember going back at the beginning of that year and talking to Josh Haberman and David Ickes, his colleague, and also my friend. And I said, I think I want to do music education. And they were like, okay. And I was like, that's it? And it's like, well, yes, but we knew that's what you wanted to do because at the time I kept re-auditioning to do music performance. But they said, we knew you didn't want to be an opera singer. And on top of that, because I started late, my skills, I had to catch up, right? But they totally was in agreement that they thought music ed would be the place for me in the vocal emphasis. And so that started my journey. And, here I am today. But that was the moment, 2002, because I was set on maybe some music industry, maybe go overseas and play basketball. I was heavy into that. But I kept singing, I kept taking music classes, and I wanted that to be a part of what I did. And that changed my life.
Wow. Choralosophy listeners will remember RyanMain.com, but he has recently created EndeavorMusicPublishing.com, which is something different, something bigger, and something better. Endeavor is not a marketplace. It's a traditional publisher with a 21st century business model, which means that they have editing. Each piece is chosen and selected with accessibility in mind. Endeavor supports composers with a majority of the sales going right to the composer. Plus, there are tons of voicings to fit the needs of your program, instant downloads, full recordings, practice materials, and more. So head over to EndeavorMusicPublishing.com graphitegpublishing.com now and check out the catalog. Don't forget, at choralosophy.com/shop, you can find shirts, you can find mugs, you can find stuff to hang on your walls in your classroom, with even more of that coming soon. So head on over there and check it out. And also, you help the show a lot when you enter Choralosophy at checkout at sightreadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. So head on over to those great websites, shop, and enter the code and save some money. That's amazing. I want to go back to your Cuba experience. To that moment, to that magical moment that you described. I had a neuroscientist on the show a year and a half ago or so, and he talked about very common theories about how our human brain even evolved. Like, why would we have evolved the desire to do music and the interest in music and the capacity of doing music? Why might that have served our ancient ancestors to survive? And of course, one of the common theories is that when we do music together, like in groups, there is this chemically driven in our hormones. The oxytocin, the trust hormone, surges through our body. We actually bond with people through singing that goes across, as you described. It's why it's such a great story, across cultures, across oftentimes when two countries are even at odds with each other, the entire structure around a person's life can be overcome by this welling up of chemicals and that induce trust. And so, like, from the neuroscientist perspective, well, wouldn't that be obvious that the people who could do music are going to be more likely to band together in tribes and be able to survive, right? So in the early days. So that's a super nerdy way to take your story. But what I'm hearing there is, like, that's exactly kind of what we all believe when we do choral music, that we have this incredibly powerful weapon to bring people together. Do you think that's what got you, or was it the music itself, or both?
I think it was both. It's interesting, because I played sports and I was competitive, there's a lot of, things that intertwine. And sometimes, it's unfortunate when I see, music people, even when I was in the music department, I would see music people kind of look at me funny, like, oh, that's a jock. And I'm like, no, 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 you don't understand. Like, there's correlation between the both, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to say that is that it was kind of, with athletics, everything was like, I have to beat you. Even if you're on a team, it's like you have to outplay this person to start, right?
Yep.
Even though y'all go in and y'all fight together and y'all play, these games together, but I have to beat you every day. Like, I got to
Yeah.
be better than you every day, right? So it's this competitiveness that it's always on, right? It's always on. And what I got with music, it wasn't competitive, right? It's competitive in some other things, but singing in choir, it was like, it was such a relief. And I just remember being like, wow, I can actually sing with the person who is different than me. And it was that sense of community. I used to love singing when I was in high school, going on tour, and just how we bonded, right? So that was a big part of it. One of the things I say, my motto is that I create communities through singing. So I think of the people first in the community, and the singing come afterwards. But the second piece is the music, right? There are certain pieces where you sing. I remember singing in high school, singing in college, where you just get all those chemicals, right? When we call goosebumps, right? We get all those things that kind of bring us together. And so when I was in Cuba, we had some great moments as well. We worked with one of the national choir directors, where we brought a Cuban piece there, and she just brought out so many other different nuances, and you just felt this feeling. I still remember being in this really hot, humid building, and we're singing. She's doing a workshop with us, and I can't remember the song or what it was, but I remember she was explaining to us how the Cubans do it. I remember singing through and then singing this last chord, and she was conducting us, and it just locked in, and you can just feel we all, like, felt the same thing. Like, at least it
Mm-hmm.
felt that way. The feeling. So I would say that it was a place where I could feel like I belonged. I didn't have to be like, I'm better than you. I got to show I'm cooler than you. It was like, I can come here, and everybody was in the choir. Athletes, people who were very smart, maybe not as athletic. All these people, and we sang in this choir, and I was like, this feels like I can be me, be community. So I
Yeah.
hope that answers your question.
No, it does. And I love that's a thing, obviously, probably that would attract almost everyone who's been attracted to choral music. Would I think we're all tapping into that ultimately. That's like the drug we're trying to recreate the high.
Yeah,
We have
yeah,
all started out with some of those highs in our early life and everything that motivates us. And I feel like this motivates me for my students is like I'm just looking around, sniffing around, trying to find something that will give them that high too. And
mhm,
it makes it for it. What I love about it the most, though, is you mentioned singing across differences too, and making music across differences. I love how quickly you start to forget about the differences even when
mhm.
once the music is started. Like there can be, I've been in so many groups where I know that I'm not going to hang out socially with any of the other people in the room. I might even have some in there that I don't really like. There might be some that I know we have like very different views on everything. And you walk into that to the rehearsal space sometimes with that in your mind, but then I feel like it goes away. Like you start singing and it goes away. You just are you become really one unit in a way that I think I wish everyone could experience.
Yes, and I agree. I mean, and I even think about as being on the other side of it as being educators, right? And just the beauty and the awe of just seeing your groups come together and just sing together. And then they come every day or every couple of days, depending on where you work, and you just see this community start to form, right? Like you said, they may not hang out outside of class, but in that moment, you see them and they're singing together, and you have composers who write this music and put these things together, and you just see this that I still get chill bumps at least 3, 4 times a week with my groups, right? And like
Mhm.
that high we talk about, right? And it's I'm not singing anymore, which I still really love to sing, but being in front of them and being able to see that happen on the other side and seeing that community being built, I think that's what brings them. Music is a big part of it, but they come for the community in my experience, and so I
Yeah.
agree with you.
Yeah, no, it's really incredible. And how have those experiences, including your childhood experiences in Chicago, how would you say they've impacted the teacher that you are now?
Interesting. Because of that, I'm able to go in any classroom.
Hmm.
I believe, right? Because what I've learned, obviously working from inner city, my story, I worked at Mission High School and I had the privilege, some people say the privilege or I was unfortunate, but I would say the privilege to literally start a program from scratch.
Hmm.
There was no music program or choir program when I got there. And so all the mistakes thing I made, I was able to make them without like, well, this is how this person used to do it. This is how this person used to do it. But I got a chance to really build. And so that helped me navigate that experience because when I saw the kids with their pants hanging down, I didn't see them as he's a thug or she's crazy. Now we had some crazy kids in there, but because of where I came from, I understood that sometimes people with their pants kind of hanging out a little bit are actually really smart kids. It's just a cultural style, right? So I was able to navigate and understand that, but then it also prepared me as I further my education. Went to Florida State, met some of my good colleagues there and peers. I started when I moved to Pennsylvania. I started working in these rural places, and I remember talking to one of my colleagues and good friend Adam Potter, and I just remember looking like, oh, rural is it's just like it's not that much different in urban, right? Because you go to some of these rural places, sometimes even a little tougher, right? You have these small schools, right? They're having issues, they're trying to bring kids in the community, kind of get them to sing and do all these other things. So it really allowed me to be more versatile and understand. And even with me growing up in Chicago, when I told you about how I had to learn how to maneuver and understand, okay, reading the room, what's this, what's that. So that allowed me to go into places or spaces and be like, okay, this is a rural setting. How do I work with this? This is an urban setting. This is a suburban setting. These are different type of settings. I work with older singers, right? And so understanding that, and I think my experience in Chicago and working in that school helped prepared me to be able to shift. So I don't feel uncomfortable in any setting, right? Um, I think that's how that's helped me in my teaching. And then also, like I said, looking at the students when I worked at Mission High School, there was one kid. His name was Bilal, and I'll never forget because he passed away. And I remember I had him in my homeroom. He also liked basketball, so that helped me when I was teaching in these schools because I was athletic as well. I could play with them, beat some of them in basketball, probably all of them at that age when I was younger. And I remember he just had this look on his face. So he just, tough look, this and that. And so I was able to walk over to him and just say, "Hey man, why you always looking tough, man? What's going on, man? What's up? What's going on?" And so because of where I kind of came from, I came with him with a softness and not like, just ignore him because he's probably like, I'm not going to say anything. And it so happened this kid, he was his family immigrated from the Middle East, Iran, and I remember they had a rough go, right? I mean, he was staying with his uncle, and his mom was living there, his sister was living there. They were living, and so we were living in San Francisco, very tough place to live financially. And I remember this kid loved basketball, so we started doing basketball, and all of a sudden, this kid who you would looked at and was like maybe rough and tough, he was in my choir. He was one of the most devoted singers in my choir. We went and worked out together, and like, I really got to know him really well on that level and understand his story. And he said, I just want to learn. And he was on the basketball team and he played. So he sang in the group. So because of that, I was able to identify certain kids and not necessarily just write them off, but actually be able to converse with them and kind of be in that space with them. So
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how little we really know about a person by looking at them? And how but how convinced we are sometimes if we're not careful that we do know. Like, just that impulse to make a judgment. And as a teacher too, and I imagine you've had this experience, but with especially in teaching in multiple backgrounds like you just described, and being able to be versatile in those, that a person's story is just really hard to read off of their face. And we miss, I don't know. I just feel like, having taught as many kids as I've taught in my life, even the concept of diversity that we a lot of times talk about, I just kind of giggle at it because like diversity is so infinite. And I think we experience that as choral educators. Thoughts about that?
yeah, there's there's a there's a lesson I do with, and I've done a presentation on a couple of times about social justice in the classroom, and my research talks a little bit about um, or looking at urban schools and how these teachers have these good programs in these Title I schools and things of that nature. And what I've learned in my teaching and in my research is that, and what I say a lot of times is that you need to learn the lay of the land and your students and the community and understand because like in San Francisco is very interesting because there is we had 46% Latino, or Latin American, but a lot of times coming from the Midwest we would think, oh, they're Mexican, right? But no, they're Ecuadorian, they're from Venezuela, they're from different parts of Latin America, and understanding that there's a diversity in that as well, right?
Yes.
Um, and understanding that it's not just ethnicity, but it's also these other things as far as diversity that kind of comes in. And so I encourage the people that I usually talk to say, well, first of all, I give them that story of that student Bilal, right? I don't go into detail like we did, but I would say, if you see a kid and if you never taught, for example, let's just say you're a Caucasian male and or a female, and you're now at this school where it's predominantly African American, and you never really had those experiences before. So if you walk into those spaces, you have to understand and be willing to learn and understand the culture and understand how that works. So you're not bringing in your own preconceived notions into that. I mean, we all have them, right? But how do you walk in and say, okay, these kids, they want to learn, or if you have a mixture, right? And so a lot of times, because of our own past, sometimes our own traumas, we walk in or how we were taught, we'll see a person and say, I know exactly who that person is. And we
Yeah.
have no idea who that person is, right? And so So to say that, yeah, I'm just piggybacking off your, what you're saying is so true, and it's so many different ways of diversity. But it's about educators how we learn, how we're open to learning, and how we, adjust to find how we can best reach that student and best teach them.
Right. Yeah, it's one of my pet peeves, but I feel like we are in the US, we are terribly uneducated on all the things that we just talked about, of like just how um for example, I talk to kids all the time that don't seem to know that white and black aren't ethnicities. Like that they're like both of those categories encapsulate a ton of ethnicities. I mean, there's like I don't know 80 ethnicities on the continent of Africa, and they all and but every single one of them would come to the United States and get put in one category. You know, and I think that's a really unfortunate thing because then in a lot of ways we erase some of that beautiful diversity. You talked about the difference between an Ecuadorian and a Mexican, or another example, a common one that drives me nuts because I'm a nerd about the language about all these things. But in the US, we have this category of Asians. But of course, if you go over there, then there's Mongols and Han Chinese and Korean, and that they think of themselves as all of the diversity that they are. So what I notice, and I think this is one of the great things about being a choir director, is I feel like I noticed that in a lot of ways the world that we all live in is set up very in such a way to keep us noticing all the ways that we're not alike, and giving us really weird categories to store them in and all the rules that society gives us. And then we sing in a choir together, and it's almost like we put a force field around ourselves for
Yeah.
against all of those things. And I just feel like we might be the most diverse and inclusive thing you can possibly do. I don't know if I'm overselling it. Thoughts?
Yeah, unfortunately, our history, in the United States, caused a lot of that, right?
Yep.
And then, um, and so, for me personally, I don't even like the black and white because I look at my skin and my skin is not black; it's brown, right?
Yep.
I look at your skin and your skin is not white, right? It's like it's a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow in there, so there is. So yeah, it's interesting when we're singing um, inquire and if the choir director as well is promoting that, because you can have groups where the leadership is not promoting that sense and of community and kind of breaking down those walls, but those who are good at cultivating that culture, it does create that force field, and you hope that you can talk to those kids, break down those those stereotypes in your classroom, and then they go out into the world, into other spaces, and understand that and have a better understanding of that, and through that, we are making a difference. Obviously, we're doing the music part, but that is just a catalyst to, at least for me, and I believe it's for a lot of choir directors, to make a world a better place, right? To make our communities better. And so, yeah, having that, that is great. I mean, sports is sometimes part of that too. Sports, you kind of have that, depends on what sport you're playing. But I think music, especially choir, um, is a good place, and just community singing is a great place to bring all that together and to kind of say, this is how it should look, or this is how it should be, when we're together and going towards a common goal versus we're separating everything, right?
Yeah.
But we can't overlook what the structures are outside of us. And so, how do we address those? How do we look at our own biases and how we are taking us to the classroom? How can we create a space where we're even checking ourselves as educators to create that sense of environment so we can have that versus what we see, unfortunately, outside of us?
Right. Now, another thing that's kind of tangential to that, I'm curious about your opinion about it. But I've noticed I'm 44, so I've been doing choir stuff for 20 something years, 22 years probably, as an adult. Um, and I feel like in the last 5 or 6 years, there's lots of obvious reasons for that, but it's become more and more common for colleagues to treat the choral enterprise as if we are a political entity working towards a social justice goal.
Hmm.
and political themed concerts have become more common than they used to be. Certain those types of things, and I'm not opposed to that. I'm just noticing that it's like increased. But what I also feel like sometimes gets forgotten as we become a more politically active field is that in a lot of ways we are the social justice goal. When we put a choir together, and I don't mean that like it solves all racism. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is that the what we would want society to move towards is a metaphor for a choir anyway. So like I feel like we're we're already like the ideal DEI program is just to make everyone sing in a choir. And in a lot of ways we've tried to create like um, this idea that we can't achieve a lot of societal goals without this political activism. But I kind of have this weird opinion that by just us doing our work together, uh, erasing a lot of differences happens just when people do stuff together, when they work together on stuff. I feel like choral music is that powerful. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to bring sports into this because I'm a sports guy and that's what
Me
I do.
too.
I love
Yeah.
sports, and that was pretty cool. So it's one thing having a team that goes on the court and play basketball, and they just go out and play. There's another if you look at, say, Phil Jackson, the Chicago Bulls from Chicago, or the LA Lakers for all my West Coast friends. Um, Phil Jackson implemented a triangle, right? And so that triangle became a system to help teach because the whole idea of the triangle is how they can literally, it was based on a triangle, but it was how they flowed off each other and based on the defense and what they did, right? So you can have a team and you can do ISO basketball. All right, I'm taking you one on one, pick and screen, screen roll, those type of things, where you're trying to score. And so it really becomes just two people, maybe three out of the five are involved, maybe just one in general. But in the triangle, everybody is involved. So the reason why I make that transfer is like when you look at a choir and you're programming, it's one thing, yes, the idea of bringing people together and what it looks like, can be a statement for social justice. But we've gone to ACDA conferences and things of that nature, and you notice that a lot of the choirs that are usually up there or on stage, not all of them, but a good number of them is mostly homogenous, right? It's mostly Caucasian choirs. They're up there singing. There's a certain type of style that's being sung, um, and so I see what you're saying, but the other side I look at is the triangle. If we just have a choir, yes, it does that. But if there's nothing in there, it's not that doesn't mean that every single concert is a social justice concert. And I know you're not saying that, but the point is if we're not training or teaching our singers or exposing them to those type of things, I think it's important to have that. And our job is exposed to a number of things. And unfortunately, things are politically charged. But if you look at history, you know, movements were started by music.
Right.
We shall overcome. Like these type of songs that were during the civil rights movement to, you know, pop music, jazz. Like certain things have been done in a way that's with the time. So when I think about choir and your comment, I don't think every concert should be a social justice, but also we have to understand that the triangle has to be in place, right? We have to also give them the tools and the exposure so that way we can kind of create a space that's within our bubble, well, in our choir, but also as we kind of go out into the world. So yeah, I think yes, we do show that, but I think also it's important to even discuss. I talk about this in my presentation. Even discuss, take a moment and sit and let's talk. Okay, something just horrible happened in our country. It's all over the news, and it may be affecting 3 out of the 40 kids in there, but it's affecting 3 of them. Let's sit down and have space for it, right?
Yep.
Let's do a piece that we're singing that's going to focus on something that we all can go towards, or at least believe that we're trying to do something that's positive for the community, and that may be social justice. So, um, So that's my thoughts on it. I think that it's not something that has to be done every single thing, but I think it's one thing having a team and just playing basketball, but it's one thing having a team and teaching your players how to be self-efficient, understand what's happening around them. And if we use the metaphor of social justice, we're using the metaphor of community or society, we can think of that as like the defense. And so if the defense shifts, we have to know how that works and kind of how we move around to get to where we're going. And I think that you can look at that as a metaphor for when things are happening in society, how do we make an impact? It's not always just seeing us up there, but what are things are what message are we giving when
Right.
needed?
No, and I agree, and I do think that that's important. I think here's how I would kind of continue to hash that out. If, let's say, just theoretically, hypothetical, you've got
Mm,
like a community choir, right? And they're going to put together an event, and they have one of their goals is you mentioned the propensity of homogenous choirs, right? Choirs of all ethnicities, or of typically one ethnicity. Of course, there are many parts of the United States where that just is the way the people look there, right? So if you've got a high school choir from Iowa, they're going to be white. There's a not much statistical likelihood that it won't be. If you've got a choir from Atlanta, it's probably mostly homogeneously black, right? You've got a black, majority in Atlanta, and so we are not a very integrated country. Like we really aren't. If you still look at maps, we've got heavy concentrations of racial segregation all across the country. And so, what if in this hypothetical, one of the social justice goals is just getting people who from different backgrounds together in the same room to make music? That's the whole goal, because we see a problem out there and not enough people understanding each other. We see racism, and we see that judging by what someone looks like kind of thing. And we know that one of the great antidotes for that is to get people together in a room to make music together, to see the human side of each other. And what if that was the whole social justice message, was that this is what we're doing? And so when I was making my comment, I'm referring to that choir kind of has a unique ability to do what I just described, which is to just on the strength of singing together alone, cause a lot of understandings to occur that might not otherwise occur. Thoughts?
Yeah, I have a good friend and former peer that I went to grad school with, Ryan Lures, and one of his research was, focusing on bringing different church cultures together to perform. And I think he still does it. He's in North Carolina. If you ask me the name of the school, I won't know it now. But we did it in Tallahassee, where he brought, there were some people from the Baptist church as well as from the Presbyterian church, and we came together and put on this concert and sang some more traditional church music to more African American traditional church music, and kind of brought it together, which was great. Yes, being different parts of the country, they are going to be what they are. And so that part I'm not debating. It's not about the actual ethnicity or race, right? I agree with you. Bringing them together can be that sense. So it doesn't necessarily be a message, but seeing people come together, that's important. Um, and I guess the only thing as we continue to have this conversation, um, it comes back to the leadership of in that group, right? And so, yes, bringing people together, but like you said, if you're in Iowa, you don't have a reason to sing about what's going on, social justice is happening to another culture, right? You don't have a reason to do that. You can just keep singing and create beautiful choral music and have an impact in your community, but you can stay in your silo as well, right? The same thing if you were in Atlanta or a different place where you kind of stay in your silo, as you sing choral music. I think it's just so yes, by us coming together and doing something can be the message, but also I strongly believe that in leadership, who's in charge of the choir, that they are being more conscientious of different cultures, especially if you have a homogenous group, right?
Yep.
Uh, being conscientious of different cultures, different things that are happening in your community or things of that nature. Singing from different style periods. All those things kind of come into the leadership of understanding, like, okay, we're going to sing great choral music, but we're not going to be just stay in that bubble and just like not push everything else out.
Right.
So I guess in a way I'm agreeing with you, but also that's that extra piece that I'm looking at is that we can have these choirs, but if leadership don't think about more intentionally about what they're singing, how they're talking about the music, the context of it, not just the Western canon, but all different types, which creates another part of diversity, right?
Right.
And so that allows just more understanding of people and cultures, especially in those more homogenous places.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and I think the comment you made is to say especially in homogeneous areas or homogeneous areas of the country where the choir then obviously would be more homogeneous. It's then that even that much more important to construct as the leader of the group to construct opportunities for those kids to get out of their silo or those young adults or whatever it is because again that choral music has that unique power to be able to do that, and so we have to be able to it's one of the reasons that I think it's so important, some of the conversations that many of us have had over the last year with kind of led by Andre Thomas, who's been going around and doing this presentation about kind of the spiritual. I think he's done it in every state probably by now, about the spiritual being really American music and us like teaching it like it's American music, and of course then you'll get kids, well, we can't, we're a white choir, we can't sing that spiritual. And if we have that approach, then what we would be essentially doing is we'd be looking at those very homogenous choirs, and we would be telling them that they have to stay homogenous.
Yeah,
Only sing the music of your people. Well,
right.
that's like, of course, the opposite of what we want from diversity. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because if we're talking specifically about African American music and spirituals, and I'm so glad Dr. Thomas is going around talking about those things. Like, I had a friend I talked to, a good friend of mine's in Nebraska, and she was asking me some of these same questions because she was in a smaller town, and she, went from back to the high school, and so she was teaching, and she was like, is this okay? Is this and that? And I explained to her, I said, like African American spirituals is American music.
Hmm.
Like it's our music, right? It's not from Europe. It's not from other. Like it's American music. It is made for everyone to sing, right? And of course, the history of it and going through from the slave songs, which have developed more to the spirituals, to the Jubilee singers that went on, and HBCUs that have gone and sing and toured and did this, at Fisk and all those things. But when these composers later on and then and now have written music, it's our music. Like we should sing it with pride. It's a great way for we talked about in that diversity, understanding where does music come from, understanding our history, why it's written this way, all these things. Like it is our music and it's meant for us to celebrate. And it's unfortunate that I've talked to some of my colleagues who said some schools take it to the point where they say, you can't sing that music. And you're
Hmm.
like, what? Like, why are you stopping this person from doing this when this person is actually working with his students and talking about it and singing it and having a deeper meaning about it, which is exposing them to our culture, to diversity of music. So my thoughts is it's American music.
Yeah.
We should sing it proudly. We're always doing, I won't say always, but a lot of times we were taught in our training, European centric music, Eurocentric music. And it's like we got a chance to sing our music. And they love it all around the world. You go anywhere in Europe or anything, you hear people in Korea, certain other places, and they're singing, African American spirituals.
Yeah.
Let's do it, right? And
Yep.
I think it's important to not just sing it, but again, the leader understanding, especially in those more homogenous groups, and for everybody, really, like you look at any other music, you want to read up on it, understand it, and you want to have space for your singers to talk about it, to understand it. Why is this piece, or why is it doing it this way? Why is it written this way, right? Why do things have more rhythm? Because that's acquiesce to what the people in Western Africa did. It's rhythm, right? And it's a direct line. So it's all these things that you can pull from this, and it's our music, and it's part of our diversity. It's part of the great things we've created here in this country. So everybody should be singing
Yeah.
and not feel bad about it or feel like, oh, well, I don't know, but you can't be afraid, right? Learn, reach out to your people that can like Andre Thomas or myself or other people that are around the country that have done the work, and being able to talk about it and just have these conversations so you can perform it. I think it's great.
Yeah, and if of course it also serves kind of back to that homogeneous choir idea, it serves to uh, take us in the same way that let me say it this way. If we have our choir do a madrigal from Italy in 1600, we obviously can't actually understand what it means to live in Italy in 1600. But that doesn't mean that it's not a worthwhile experiment and a worthwhile exercise for students to consider. The people who sang this music might have lived XYZ kind of a life. What
Mhm.
would that be like? Now let's hear what their music sounded like. That exercise is valuable all the time. So even if you're a white choir from Iowa and you cannot understand truly what it was like to be a black person in the 1840s when a song might have originated or whatever, it doesn't mean it's no longer like suddenly because of our dysfunctional racial history in the United States, suddenly that rule changes, and we shouldn't teach those students to try to experience that through whatever means we can in their class, even though there might not be a black person for 80 miles in any direction,
Yeah.
right? And it's still valuable for them to do that. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the same idea you're just talking about, right? It's again, it's about exposure, right? And if you don't, we have the privilege of two things. Is with choral music we have words, so because we have words and text, that allows us to dive in and to dissect and to talk about historical context and those things, and bring, like you said, experiment. I would also add to that, it's like bring that particular place and time to life, right? And so when you're looking at African American spiritual and going back there, and sometimes those are there are uncomfortable conversations that are had, but without actually feeling or understanding, how can you really make impactful music, right?
Hmm.
And if you're out there just singing, yeah, it can sound good, but I think when we talked about earlier in this podcast, where we talk about those good feelings, those
Hmm.
chemicals, those highs, right? And I know for me, and maybe for I can probably say for you too, when you tell a story to your students and how this comes together, and now this particular chord, this particular piece is starting to crescendo. This is an emotion, right? This is something that was happening, and so this crescendo is leading up to this particular point in time, and this is what this person was thinking, and this is how it kind of unfolds. And all of a sudden, your students are like, "Whoa!" Because now you're bringing in this is what was happening in 1844. We know we're using the time. It's happened in 1840. This is when the underground, or not the underground road, but when they were trying to get to the north, and they're talking about a certain thing of the Jordan, the River Jordan, and how that's parallel to the Old Testament to now, and how this particular part where this grows, this can be, for example, the excitement of freedom, or the excitement of going to heaven, and so now you're bringing all these things into it, which allows us to feel and to sing with purpose versus just singing, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so I think we have the privilege of having those words and having these stories and these contexts that will allow us to either experiment of the Italian music, or magical, or any other genre, but putting them into that place and how you can make it relevant to them is what really bring those good Philly feelings. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yep.
And at the same time create that sense of exposure, a sense of diversity, especially in these homogenous choirs, to be like, you know what, I know you've been living here most of your life and you're only seeing this, but there is a cool, exciting world out there, and music is the window for you, and
Hmm.
let's help you get to that point, right? So that's what I think. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, that's
exciting.
really good. That's really good. And that's actually a a really good way to wrap this up. I'm interested in kind of your final thoughts on what you kind of just to take it back to the beginning, what you feel like you've learned in this journey and what you hope to pass on to your students. You teach. I am correct that you have music education students.
Yes.
Okay. So, you've got kids that are going to go out and then be music teachers. What about your story would you want to have imparted on them? Even if it's nothing musical per se, but just like how you want your students to approach themselves as educators.
I would like for them to approach music education or when they go into a classroom as a place of, and really for them really to go on, because the students that I teach, um, are predominantly Caucasian, right? I do have some mixture here and there. But one of the things when I left the K through 12 and I decided to go get my doctorate, it's something that a professor said to me when I was in college, and it stuck with me. African American professor who has PhD, and I was like, whoa, he was, he was social science, and I remember he said something to me. He said, when you are in a primary school or secondary school, you teach those students, and that positive impact and influence that you have on them, they go out into the world. He said, if you decide to become a professor, you get to teach those music education students who go out to teach those other students. And so now your positive impact is larger. And so for me, that was something that I was like, that's how I want to leave the world a better place, right? Before I leave it. And so when I start teaching at, inner city schools and things of that nature, I realized, one, I needed more training. Two, I was like, I want to be able to go out and teach students to not to be afraid to go into these spaces, because these kids need great music education too, right? Because it changed my life, right? And as I grew in my education and learned more, I started, like I said, a rural area, same way, inner city, suburban. Doesn't mean that affluent kids don't need it either. But I want to impart on my students to not go into these spaces and feel like you only want one thing and what you had before. Go into these spaces, learn, grow as an educator, and go in there and help them to become great citizens and advocates for music. And so that's what I would like to impart on my students, to go out there and something they love, but don't just stay in your little area, right? Don't be afraid. And so because I was able to do that, I'm hoping that I'm able to teach them in that space. And so I've been able to do some things at UD to help them, have that experience. But that's my thing. It's how can I help make the world a better place before I leave it? And so through that, I'm hoping that I'm giving that same idea for them as they go out into their own classrooms when they become teachers.
That's awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining me for an hour and sharing your story and being vulnerable. I appreciate it. I think this is really good.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for thinking of me.
Thank you all for listening to this episode. As always, the way that we keep Choralosophy moving into the future. We just hit 5 years, and the way we hit 5 more years and continue to grow and expand, the way that this platform can be valuable to you, the listener, and can continue to be valuable to the music education landscape is you being involved. The ways that you can be involved, of course, are entering the Choralosophy promo code at all the websites that allow that. They are amazing partners that have been with us mostly since the beginning. That's SiteReadingFactory.com, MyMusicFolders.com. That is also EndeavorPublishing.com and GraphitePublishing.com. You can also, of course, go over to Ludus and check out their products. You can do the things directly for the show that help, like go to patreon.com/Choralosophy and chip in $3 a month. And if you can't do any of those things, I just want you to join the conversation. So head on over to the Choralosophers Facebook page, like, share, leave comments anywhere that you're able to see the content. Those help other people see the content and join the conversation as well. We are building a movement here, and we want you to be a part of it. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.